Today, I want to share my journey with you, a journey that took me from the streets of East London to finding my true purpose in Islam. I'm a child of two worlds. My mother is Italian, my father Nigerian. But more than that, I'm a soul on a journey to Allah. Looking back now, I can see how every step, even the painful ones, led me exactly where I needed to be. Picture East London in the 1980s. Our neighbourhood was predominantly Bangladeshi Muslim, and from my first floor window, I had a front row seat to a world I didn't yet understand but was destined to join. I would spend hours watching the faithful enter the makeshift masjid across the street, fascinated by their rhythmic movements of prayer. At the time, I was just a curious child, not knowing that Allah was already planting the seeds of my future faith. My early religious experience was Christian, not just culturally Christian, but deeply involved. I became a born-again Christian as a teenager, throwing myself into the faith with the same passion that would later define my journey to Islam. My mother had always encouraged me to question everything, to seek understanding rather than blind acceptance. This gift of curiosity would eventually lead me to truth, though not in the way either of us expected. The question started small, but grew larger with time. How could Jesus be both God and the Son of God? How could a human being who ate, slept, and lived as we do be divine? I remember sitting in church, feeling the spiritual energy around me, but being unable to quiet the logical voice in my head that kept asking, how? When I brought these questions to our pastor, his answer was simple. Just have faith. Those three words changed everything. They made me realize that I needed more than just emotional fulfillment. I needed rational answers to my spiritual questions. It's ironic now to think that my father was born Muslim, though he left the faith after my grandfather's death. Had he remained Muslim, my journey might have been very different. But Allah's plan unfolds in its own perfect way. My first real connection with Islam came during a moment of childhood pain. Our home was often filled with arguments, and one particularly bad fight between my parents sent me running to my room in tears. I grabbed my mother's beautiful Asian shawl, a gift from her Pakistani colleague, and did something that surprised even me. I prostrated on it, just as I'd seen the Muslims do in the masjid across the street. In that moment of desperation, I felt closer to God than I ever had before. This connection deepened 2 years later when I attended the janazah prayer for a classmate who had died in a tragic accident. I borrowed a scarf from my Somali friend and joined the congregation at East London Mosque. Something about the communal grief, the structured prayer, the sense of peace, even in mourning, it touched something deep within me. But my real journey to Islam began through an unlikely friendship in secondary school. She was everything I wasn't: quiet, modest, deeply religious. What drew me to her was her incredible inner peace, especially given that her home life was even more troubled than mine. When I asked her how she maintained such serenity in the face of chaos, her answer was simple. It's my faith. The irony is that I started studying Islam to save her from what I saw as an oppressive religion. I was convinced that the hijab would hold her back, that Islamic practices would limit her potential. I began reading the Quran with the arrogant intention of finding contradictions. Instead, I found myself being transformed. The more I studied, the more my preconceptions crumbled. Instead of finding contradictions, I discovered a comprehensive way of life. The scientific references in the Quran left me amazed. The literary beauty, even in translation, moved me deeply. But with this growing conviction came growing fear. I knew myself well enough to know that if I accepted this truth, I would embrace it completely. There would be no half measures, no casual commitment. The prospect of such total transformation terrified me. So I did what scared people often do. I ran. I threw away all the Islamic materials I'd collected, cut off contact with my Muslim friends, and tried to forget everything I'd learned. But you can't unknow truth once you've recognised it. The turning point came during a simple walk. I was standing at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, when a thought hit me with overwhelming clarity. If I died right now, crossing this road, knowing what I know about Islam but having rejected it, what would I say to Allah? In that moment, all my fears about changing my life seemed trivial compared to the weight of denying what I knew to be true. Taking my Shahada was both the easiest and hardest decision of my life. Easy because it felt like finally coming home. Hard because of what followed. My mother's reaction when I came home wearing hijab was just the beginning. The pain of her eventual rejection, "I've done my job, I no longer need to be your mother," still echoes in my memory. At 17, I found myself essentially alone, trying to navigate not just my new faith, but basic survival. The pressure became too much. I temporarily stopped practicing, though I never lost my belief. But you can't run from your true self forever. The emptiness of living against my beliefs eventually led me back to Islam, but this time on my own terms. I started small, 1 page of Quran in English each day, gradually returning to hijab, rebuilding my prayer practice. This organic return to faith without external pressure or community expectations was even sweeter than my original Shahada. Allah's plans are perfect, even when we can't see the whole picture. Years later, my mother began her own journey to Islam, eventually taking her Shahada. The very faith that once separated us became the bond that brought us back together. Today, when people ask if I feel restricted by Islamic practices, I can only smile. I've found true freedom in submission to Allah. We're all devoted to something, whether it's wealth, status, or desires. I choose to devote myself to the one who created me, understands me, and guides me to my best self. My journey continues every day, and I'm grateful for every step, even the painful ones. Because each step brought me closer to understanding that true freedom isn't about doing whatever we want. It's about aligning our will with our Creator's purpose for us. And in that alignment, we find peace, purpose, and the profound joy of being exactly who we were meant to be.